In the intriguing realm of ancient Roman matrimony, the concept of marriage diverged significantly from our modern understanding. Back then, a marital union was less about love and companionship and more about transactions and alliances. What's more, infidelity among husbands was not just commonplace, it was practically expected. These dalliances ranged from casual encounters with courtesans to more enduring affairs. While these extramarital liaisons often involved women, it was equally customary for men to engage in romantic trysts with their male counterparts. When delving into the ancient Roman perspective on sexuality, we must shed our modern notions of sexual orientation. Romans did not categorize individuals into neatly defined labels of homo, bi, or heterosexual. Their primary concern lay not in the gender of those involved but rather in the dynamics of power within the sexual act itself. In heterosexual relationships, it was the man who assumed the role of the giver, while the woman took on the role of the receiver. This configuration symbolized the man's dominance, as the woman willingly submitted to his authority. In contrast, when two men engaged in a relationship, one had to adopt the role of the receiver, effectively embracing a more feminine, non-submissive position. One prevalent and socially accepted form of same-sex relationship was known as paiderasty. This arrangement paired an adult man, known as the aristes, with a teenage boy referred to as the eromenes. Yet, this wasn't just a matter of physical intimacy, it encompassed a mentorship dynamic as well. Surprisingly, the age gap in such relationships did not raise eyebrows, unlike today, especially among the upper echelons of society. For them, this bond served as a rite of passage, offering the young boy valuable connections beyond his familial ties and an introduction to the senatorial elite. Even among the powerful figures of the time, it was quite customary for emperors and influential individuals to maintain both male and female lovers. Astonishingly, neither of these relationships was perceived as unfaithfulness in the way we understand it today. In an era where contraceptives were non-existent and childbirth ranked as the leading cause of death for women, a man's extramarital encounters could be viewed as a form of birth control, sparing his spouse from life-threatening pregnancies. In the context of same-sex relationships, the emperor or the higher-ranking partner typically assumed the dominant, masculine role, signifying their authority and power. However, the Romans sometimes puzzled their contemporaries by adopting the submissive, more feminine role. Even Julius Caesar, the most influential man in Rome, found pleasure in being the receptive partner in his same-sex liaisons, leaving the Roman populace baffled. The enigmatic Emperor Hadrian broke from the norm by exclusively engaging in relationships with men, despite being married to a woman for political reasons. Historians even speculate that Hadrian and his wife never consummated their marriage. Much of this conclusion is drawn from the multitude of lovers that both Hadrian and his wife took, coupled with the particular attention he paid to his male companions. Throughout his life, Hadrian shared his affection most deeply with a captivating teenager named Antonius. He ensured that the young man received a comprehensive education, and together, they embarked on extensive travels. Tragically, their years of companionship were marred by an unforeseen calamity. While journeying through Egypt, Antonius met a mysterious end, drowning in the Nile. Stricken with grief, Hadrian established a city near the site and named it in honor of his beloved. He also carried Antonius's mummified remains back to Rome, minting coins bearing the young man's likeness and deifying him. Thus, Antonius was elevated to the status of a god, and his worship spread throughout the empire. Emperor Nero, however, distinguished himself with his peculiar treatment of his lovers. In general, emperors selected their consorts from among palace slaves and often continued to treat them as such. Nero deviated from this pattern by forcing his male lovers to participate in bizarre wedding ceremonies. One such lover was Pythagoras, a former slave who experienced an unconventional marriage with Nero. In this instance, Pythagoras was the groom and Nero was the bride, veil and all. This, of course, was one of the instances where the public was confused by the emperor's behavior. He was the ruler, the one with the power, so shouldn't he have played the masculine role? That wasn't the only time that Nero married a man. A few years later, he married another slave boy named Spurus. This time, Nero made his people happy by fitting the masculine role they expected him to take. However, his actions here are much worse sounding to our modern sensibilities. To make sure that the people knew that Nero was fitting into the powerful masculine role, he had the boy castrated. There are other instances of Nero's cruelty towards his lovers and concubines, but history has painted him in a particularly bad light, and it can be hard to shift out the truth from the exaggerations. For example, one historian from his time wrote that Nero and his mother were in an incestuous relationship. This is certainly not true, but it's the type of thing that was commonly said about him after his death. Emperor Tiberius. Tiberius was one of the worst offenders for mistreatment of his lovers, if you can really call his concubines that. He's a prime example of an older man who liked to sleep with younger boys. Because of his attraction to children and the specific things he enjoyed doing with the young boys, he's now seen as one of the most sexually depraved of the empress. Most of his actions took place outside of Rome, so some of the reports are sure to be exaggerated, but many are also sure to be true. Tiberius spent much of his time in private villas on islands in the Mediterranean. He had young boys brought to the islands to be his household servants and also to satisfy his sexual desires. It wasn't purely sex that he would demand from his young concubines, though there were a number of gross things that he would have these young boys do. One of the worst things he did was train particular young boys to swim between his legs while he bathed. He then had them nibble on his genitals under the water. Still worse, he would take newborn babies from their mothers and hold them to his erect crotch to simulate holding an infant to their mother's breast. In addition to those terrible things, Tiberius did not just demand that the young boys sleep with him, he would also force them to sleep with each other in any number of groupings while he watched to get himself ready to perform the same act. These historical accounts provide a mesmerizing glimpse into the intricate and unconventional sexual dynamics of ancient Rome, challenging our modern sensibilities and inviting us to reconsider our assumptions about love, power, and relationships in a bygone era. Thanks for watching.